Tere päevast, kallid kolleegid! Ammu rohkem kui pool saljandit tagasi osalen siin Tartus Baltimaa süüdespordi võistlustes, mis kajak or Baidarka. Juba siis kiindusin sellesse linna. Kui sain teada, et järjekordne Baltimaade restauraatoride triennaal asub Tartus ja veel 6 museumis, väga tahtsin sellelt võtta osa. Aitäh triennaali korraldajate poolt antud võimalust mul osaleda. Mina päris ei oska inglise keelt ja kui mina prooviks ettekannet ise lugeda, siis see oleks jubedus minule endale ja egat moodi ka teile kuulajatele. Minu arukad lapsed andsid nõu esitada audio-erikuja ja aitasid valmistud. Loodan, ei kõik läheb korda. Tänan tähelepanu eest. Please audio.
Once upon a time, I wanted to become an archaeologist and dedicate my life to the study of ancient Latvian history. I never imagined that I would work at the Rundal Palace or that I'd be a textile conservator. But fate plays its own cards, and since 1973, I have been working with the Duke of Courland crypts and the Dukes of Courland, who I was once quite indifferent to, but have become close friends with. Although I have been conserving the Duke's burial garments, they were hidden within their eternal homes in sarcophagi. My lecture is not intended to provide an in-depth analysis of the problem or offer any solution, but to briefly present the sarcophagus restoration program at Rundal Palace Museum. I hope experts will discuss it further in one of the next conferences. As many of you probably know, the Duke of Courland crypts are located in the Jelgava castle, which is quite an unusual combination, a castle and crypts. But in the second half of the 16th century, when the Livonian order castle still existed, the crypts were placed in the basement of the castle church, where they remained until 1737, at what time the new Courland Duke, Ernst Johann von Biron, decided to build a more appropriate castle for the 18th century. Then the old castle and church were blown up, and a new Father Rastrelli-designed Baroque palace was built in its place. The Kettler family Duke sarcophagi were lifted out of the church crypts, placed in a barn, and at some point in the second half of the 18th century, placed in the palace basement in specially allotted rooms. The crypts have been in their current location since 1820. Initially there were a few small rooms, but with time they were enlarged. I must say, it's good that the crypts are in the castle and not the church basement, as otherwise we wouldn't be able to create such a museum as we see today. Interest in the Duke of Courland crypt history began in the early 18th century. A doctor and amateur historian from Kuldīga, J.G. Weigons, wrote an essay on the Kettler family genealogy, to which he added the sarcophagus texts. Dr. Alexander Raphaels studied the crypts from 1913 to 1914, but his work was interrupted by the First World War. Over the centuries, the tombs have been repeatedly damaged. In 1705, during the Great Northern War, in 1919, Bermontians burned the Jelgava castle and severely vandalized the crypts. In 1933 and 1934, the employees of the Board of Monuments cleaned up the crypts, repaired the sarcophagi and opened them up for viewing. In 1944, the Red Army destroyed 95% of Jelgava. The castle was also bombed. For about 2 years, the crypts were subject to systematic demolitions until they were bricked up in 1946. There was little left of their ancient glory. It's good that the heavy tin sarcophagi could not be easily carried away somewhere, but they did suffer breakages, blows. They were even shot at. When the Rundal Palace staff entered the crypts in 1973, there was major desolation. Since 1987, the Rundal Palace Museum holds responsibility over the crypts. Under the leadership of the museum director, Mr. Lance Manis, a tomb restoration and exhibition concept was developed with the aim to prevent the gradual destruction of these outstanding historic and artistic monuments so that they could be preserved for the next generation. The items on view in the crypts are in fact the only surviving objects from the Kettler family dukes, sarcophagi, garments, and their fragments. As the timing for this essay was limited, I will tell you all about the common processes of sarcophagus restoration right after each item's problems and solutions. The restoration methodology was developed under the leadership of the head of department, Aina Bolode, in consultation with Sarmit Geisminer of LNVM. Resources were needed to do this work, so we wrote projects and found sponsors. The main supporters of our tin sarcophagus restoration program were the Courland Knighthood United Foundations, led by Otto von Groothuis, LKKF, the State Cultural Capital Foundation, while most of the expenditure was covered by the Rundal Palace Museum from its own resources. As is usual, the restoration process is begun with a description of the objects. I will describe the main types of damage which are characteristic to all sarcophagi. The first and main cause is human acts of violence. The sarcophagus is a large and very heavy object, and it can't be easily opened to peek what's inside. You need to bang it, break it, shoot it, and so on. One might break off the decorative elements, such as the crying angel figures on Duchess Sophia Amelia's sarcophagus cover, the decorative plates on Duchess Anna's and Sophia's sarcophagi, or remove the coat of arms and break off a piece of monolith from the sarcophagus of Duke Ferdinand. The next most prevalent cause of damage is the harmful influence of the surrounding environment. Of course, we only think about temperature and moisture levels now at the museum, now that we have become more knowledgeable of these matters. In the basement of the castle or the church, such things were not considered. Mostly these conditions were not so bad, but in the summers, the cool metal sarcophagi accumulated condensation, which accelerated metal corrosion processes and the decay of the inner contents. As a result of these processes, all the sarcophagi chests have severely damaged floorings, and the inner iron constructions have rusted. After being lifted out of the church crypts, the sarcophagi were lying in a barn for a long time, where they were constantly exposed to changing seasonal temperatures and moisture, which triggered damage of the covers, particularly of the lids. This is especially noticeable in Duchess Louise Charlotte's sarcophagus cover, where the appliqued decorations have lost their form. Dust covered the surfaces, rubble dropped from the room's plastering. There were effects from smoke when the castle and the city burned. Of course, natural aging processes of the metal also occur, such as amortization. The once silvery, shimmering sarcophagi were covered with patina and turned grey. As a result of metal oxidation, surface swelling occurred, which particularly damaged the carved coats of arms and lettering. The leg mounts were distorted from the weight of the objects, and lids had slipped off, etc. One subsequent action was to take samples of the base metal and conduct polychrome chemical analyses. This was led by Indra Tunia from the National History Museum of Latvia. In the table that you can see, all the castings had lead and bismuth added to them, as a result of which even at low temperatures, white tin transformation or grey tin fever did not come about. The presence of other elements could also be in the raw material. Stabilization of support structures. When I asked Arvis Druvins, "How do you begin?" He told me that you should first ensure that all the angles are straight and nothing moves. That's why a variety of added metal constructions are affixed, so you would be able to adjust the edges of the sarcophagus and the corner angles, so that in the end, the lid and the crate can be perfectly compatible. Duke Wilhelm's sarcophagus, which didn't initially have an iron frame throughout, but only up to the handlebolt section, had a wooden support structure inserted, and a tin lid placed on top of the wooden lid. Duke Gotthard's sarcophagus, which was made of quite thick tin plates, was not reinforced with an iron support structure, but was welded anew, and a tin sheet was placed across the whole length of the crate, and a new support added above it. Duchess Louise Charlotte's sarcophagus support elements were severely damaged and somehow incorrectly placed. The whole construction was removed, cleaned of rust, fixed, and covered with anti-corrosion material. But Duke Jakob's sarcophagus support structures had survived in their entirety. They were cleaned of rust and covered with tannin solution. The most elaborate support structure had to be made for the high Baroque sarcophagus of Duchess Sophia Amelia, 1688, to regain its earlier shape. To be able to renew the lid's Baroque form, the right size pipes had to be found, on which the renewed shape could be built, and then iron mounts were welded on. When everything was fastened, its lost side was attached, deformations could be eliminated, the missing end plate welded on, and the sarcophagus lid could be cleaned. Gilding remains were then strengthened and the surface preserved. Areas of base material loss were eliminated. The smaller holes were welded shut. Post-welding maintenance was carried out in the welding areas. New tin plates were placed upon the larger holes, which were produced by Jānis Kalniņš Ugāles organ workshop. The missing sarcophagus end plates were also produced there. The destruction of the base material of Duchess Louise Charlotte's sarcophagus cover lid was so vast that it couldn't be welded. So it was duplicated on steel sheets and clinched together with the base material. But the upper areas of loss had to be plastered so that the surface would be even. A pine board was fitted in the interior, and above it steel rebars. The sarcophagus crate and sides of the lid were fixed by the brazing method. The next process of restoration was the production of the missing details and affixing, welding them on in the areas of loss. We took the shape of the element from the original, created heat-resistant moulding forms, and casted them in tin. We cast the shape of the sarcophagus. We modelled the accurate shape for other sarcophagi from analogues, and we moulded the sarcophagi legs after a wax model. We modelled the lost details from old photos or illustrations, such as the crying angel figures on Duchess Sophia Amelia's sarcophagus cover. The intricate work was carried out by conservator Master Gunnar Grinfeldt. The decorative mouldings and other simpler elements were prepared for casting by Arvis Druvins. Cleaning, toning, and conservation of the sarcophagus cover. Removal of layers of dirt from the surface with a 5% ethanol solution and vaporization. The recommendations of boiling the objects in distilled water to dissolve corrosion products was unrealistic due to the size of the restoration objects, so we chose to use hot steam. For removing areas of poorly soluble and thick salt residue, Complexone 3 5 to 7% local solution compressors were used. Then they were neutralized with water vapor, which is effective for rinsing. Layers of tin oxidation were removed with ultrasonic scalers, and the purified areas were rinsed with water vapor. The steam current can rinse away dirt that accumulates under the appliqued ornaments. When the sarcophagus surface is cleaned and rinsed, it needs to be well dried, and only then can it be toned. Natural pigments are used for toning. Microcrystal wax was used for conserving the surface. The restored sarcophagi were carefully wrapped and transported back to the crypts. The mortal remains were organized in the new coffins and placed back into the sarcophagi. Each sarcophagus was reconsecrated in a ceremony headed by the Archbishop of the Latvian Evangelical Lutheran Church, Jānis Vanaks. Among the participants were the Courland knighthood representatives, the Rundāl Palace Museum director, restorers, Latvian Agriculture University representatives and journalists. Now, let's look at all 8 restored sarcophagi. I have arranged them chronologically. Duke Gotthard, 1587. Duchess Anna, 1602. Duchess Sophia, 1610. Duke Wilhelm, 1640. Duchess Louise Charlotte, 1676. Duke Jakob, 1682. Duchess Sophia Amelia, 1688. Duke Ferdinand, 1737. In conclusion, I want to tell you about quite an incredible mysterious case related to Duchess Sophia. The sarcophagus was taken to the crypts. We organised the mortal remains of the coffin, transferred them from the tin trough, which contained the skeleton, together with the bottom boards of the coffin and all sorts of rubbish. In the photograph of this process, 2 seemingly see-through hands appeared, which may have been indicating that we need to dig deeper. This all happened in the crypts. We decided to put the bones in the coffin, but the trough, with all its contents, was taken to the palace to be reviewed unhurriedly. The Duchess's clothing had not survived, and I was interested in the fabric remains that were among the rubbish. We sorted through an approximately 10-centimetre thick layer of debris. In the presumed pelvic region we found 3 gold rings, which had been there since 1610, untouched by foreign hands. They still held Sophia's and Duke Wilhelm's fingerprints, particularly Wilhelm's bestowed engagement ring. It's a mystery. Maybe Sophia's hands pointed me to look there. Sarcophagus restoration entails teamwork. Thank you to everyone who participated. Thank you to the practical workers, the researchers, the organisers, the sponsors. And God forbid no other destruction or war or devastation comes to our land.